Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Faith and Finance Forum, hosted by the Catholic Finance Association and presented by Aquinas Wealth Advisors. We have a wonderful guest today. We have the Honorable Dr. John Hillen with us. How are you, Dr. Hillen?
Well, thank you, John. Good to see you.
Well, thanks for being on the show. Let's start with a quick prayer, shall we? Father,
Yes.
Son, Holy Ghost, Amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy
Holy
Mary,
Mary,
Mother of
Mother of
God,
God,
pray
pray
for
for us
us
sinners
sinners,
now and at the hour
now
of
of
our
our
death.
death. Amen.
Amen.
Saint Teresa of Calcutta, pray for us.
Pray for
Father,
us.
Son, Holy Ghost, Amen. Well, Dr. Hillen, it is so good to see you, my friend. It's been a few years since you and I used to sneak behind the bushes for a cigar at the Legatus Summit, but here we are again, my friend. How you been since then?
We did. I think they're still looking for us out there, still trying to follow the cigar smoke.
Well, God bless you, my friend. You're always doing so many interesting things, and part of the reason we're talking today is you have a great new book out that's really making a splash. It's called The Strategy Dialogues, a primer on business strategy and strategic management. Tell us a little bit about the inspiration behind this book.
Well, thanks, John. So the inspiration, the big inspiration, the uber inspiration, the meta inspiration was how do I bring strategy out of the clouds and make it easily graspable by anybody? This is something every executive is told they have to have a competency in. You need to be a more strategic thinker. We hear this
Yes.
said all the time. And yet, almost nobody's trained in it or told what that means or how to do it. I tell a story in the book. Um, a friend of mine was an executive coach working with a young executive, and a board member said, "Well, is she ready for the C-suite?" And and the coach said, "Well, I think she is," and outlined a way of examining this question, this range of executive competencies, and so on. And the director said, "Well, I don't think she thinks strategically." So the coach said to the director, "What does that mean to you?" Guy couldn't answer the question, right? So we're often holding people accountable, responsible for this ephemeral ability, think strategically. So I've been trained as a strategist, very blessed to have been trained by some of the best minds of our time. I'm a natural strategist, which is not normal. Less than 5% of the population naturally thinks strategically. Um, so I made it a goal to try to bring this down, make it accessible and practical and even a little bit entertaining, which is how our friend Patrick Lencioni
Yes.
described the book, so that people aren't intimidated by it and can just get it.
And by the way, Patrick Lencioni isn't the only high-profile endorser of your book. I noticed that you have Arthur Brooks, friend of the program and
Right?
accomplished author in his own right, endorsing the book. And how about Lieutenant General H.R. McMaster, your old friend from Operation Desert Storm, endorsing the book too, and other
That's right.
big
And
names
all
too, I'm
and all
sure.
three of
Yeah,
those guys, great
yeah,
Catholic leaders. In
yeah.
fact, it's online, but General McMaster HR just recently gave a presentation out at the seminary at St. Patrick's Seminary in Menlo Park.
Nice.
I would encourage people to watch. In fact, I got a note from my friend Bishop Michael Barber, the Bishop of Oakland, about it. And Arthur, I've done retreats with. So you know, there's a great line. You like me, we love J.R.R. Tolkien for a
Yes.
lot of reasons. And I walked past St. Aloysius in Oxford, the church at which he was a daily communicant a couple of months ago. And but he once said about his own books, The Lord of the Rings, that they're not overtly Catholic, but there's a Catholic worldview that
Yes.
permeates them. And I think if readers look closely, as Patrick and Arthur and HR did, they'll probably see that in this book too. It's a little bit about the interior life you can have to be a good strategic executive.
You know, one of the promises of the book, John, is that you will discover the skills that set top tier strategists apart. You'd be hard pressed to find an executive or CEO who doesn't profess herself to be a great strategic thinker. That's just like, part of the job description, I think. But in your experience, which is significant in this space, what is the thing that separates the good from the great in this dimension?
So one thing really, and I try to simplify things without making them simplistic.
Yeah.
But on this, I feel very confident. The one thing that separates is the understanding that strategy is a way to think, not a what to think. A lot of people think strategy is a brilliant idea generation
Hmm.
contest. A lot of people think it's a destination or a formula. Those are all part of it.
Hmm.
But at the end of the day, strategy is a way to think, a way to view the world around you, a sensibility in many ways, a way to interpret your surroundings and the events, process information, and then take action. So I think that's really the key. It's not a formula, it's not a specific outcome, it's a way to think. And in the book, I take pains to break that down and make it a really simple, disciplined methodology for people to learn to think strategically.
Fascinating. And John, you mentioned that you believe yourself to be one of those natural strategic thinkers. I'm wondering, at what point in your development did you become truly confident that? When did you look at yourself in the mirror, you say, "Hey, I am a strategy guy. This is what I was meant to do." Tell us some early episodes in your life that brought that to light.
Yeah, well, you put it's rare, and this has been tested. I think undertaking strategy is still illegal in 13 states. So it's a rare skill and not always practiced. A big study I emphasize there says 4% of
Wow.
people are natural strategists. And what they mean by that is their action logic, the way they explain their decisions, the way they protect their turf if they're challenged, um, is strategic. So if I said to you, hey, John, it'd be great if you could mobilize the team and get this done by next Friday. And my rationale to try to encourage you to take on that goal would be because if it's done by next Friday, then we'll have this bit of information. We have that information we can see there. And if we can see there, we can move there. If we move there, we can shape that. It's this kind of natural progression, connecting a series of movements ultimately to exploit an opportunity or take advantage of something to improve the position of the organization. So for me, um, I realized that this was a natural strength area of mine. And have you ever taken, like strength finders and any of those
Yes.
psychometric tests? Yeah. So in strength finders, two of my top five categories are in the strategy, strategic thinking category. So it's, okay, duh.
Yeah.
I've got one in executing because I've been the COO of a big organization, so I know how to get stuff done.
Yes.
And I've got two in influencing people because I'm a sales guy, right? You have to go down to number 17 in my 40 strengths before you see one in the building relationships category, which, is doesn't mean I'm bad at it, but it means it's not my
Yes.
natural move to try to bring people along. I'm a vision
Yes.
person. Plans and motivate everybody person as opposed to
Yes.
let me sit with you for a while and understand on your terms why you're uncomfortable with my plan. I'm sort of the train's leaving the station, get on board and let's go. So that was a nice reminder to me to say I have to spend time building relationships to be a really good leader. And so
John, I'm sorry, go
this
ahead.
this set of qualities was obvious to me
Yeah.
pretty earlier in my career, not the least reason being in the negative is I didn't love the tactical stuff. I didn't love the day to day. I was always asking annoying questions. At the end of Desert Storm, I'm asking, why didn't we go all the way to Iraq?
Yes.
And why do we encourage the Shias to rebel and yet not give them any help? And are we leaving Saddam in place? We're not. So I'm asking all these questions. And a lot of people are looking at me like, Lieutenant, it's kind of not really your job. Go get your your crew motivated for the next small movement. So it was pretty obvious to me early on that my mind worked a little differently.
Fascinating. And actually, let's go back to that time as a lieutenant because a lot of our listeners are young leaders, emerging executives, kind of at the beginning or the midpoint of their careers. And this is perfect for you, John, as a accomplished college professor too, a teacher of young leaders. If you are like you, John, a natural strategic thinker, visionary, high level guy, and you're early in your career where you're not given a lot of responsibilities like that. I mean, your job is more to perform tasks,
Right.
to handle operational and tactical level things. That's going to be an uncomfortable moment for you because that's not your natural inclination. What guidance would you give to other strategists who, just given, the place they're at in their career, are doing mostly tactical or operational tasks?
Yeah, that's a great point, John. And and well into our careers as executives, it doesn't matter what your field is or what your role is, we get rewarded, promoted, and advanced based on our ability to get things done. Technical and tactical skills and task accomplishment. That is 90% of life, professional life. The problem is as you get up to the upper ranks where people start to be in charge of other people or things, people are in a place where they have to determine the direction of the institution, not just the accomplishments of its task. Technical and tactical skills don't get you very far there. You need strategic and interpersonal skills, but you haven't been trained for those along the way. So my advice is whether you're a natural strategic thinker or not, is you're going to need this down the road. It's like playing golf for half your life without a 7 iron in your bag. And then halfway through your life, someone's like, I think you're ready for the 7 iron. You're like, boy, I could have used that for the last 15 years. So put the club in your bag early.
Yeah.
Put the club in your bag early. But that doesn't mean you mess up the other clubs, right? So for me, I had to focus really hard on being good at the task accomplishment that wasn't my favorite thing. I remember when I was a tank platoon leader, you have 4 tanks, 16 men in a platoon, and a lot of very physical stuff. Your office is outside, right? You're working outside, hard men, hard missions. And one of the things you had to do is everybody on the tank crew had to be able to perform every task. You had to be able to drop the breech block. You had to be able to change the treads if they got blown off. And huge tasks, lots of tools, lots of strength. I'm fine with strength. I'm fine with the conception. I'm just like not really a tool, put it all together guy. I'm
Mm.
the least handy person you've ever met. And so, yeah, for me, I had to really, really focus. I had to get help. I had to
Mm.
reach out and say, I'm not good at this, but you are. Let's form a team
Mm.
and get mentored and helped along. And when, in particular, one sergeant, Sergeant Willie Burns, still one of my great friends, just sort of adopted me and said, "Okay, you got a big brain but clumsy hands. Let's get you through this,
Yeah.
this bit." So that was hugely helpful. So you can't let it be debilitating.
Mm.
But on the other hand, a career progressions require every executive to be pretty well rounded, and that includes being able the conceptual realm, being able
Mm.
to think strategically.
Gosh, and that's really one of the genesis points of leadership, isn't it? To say to, a team member or an ally or a colleague, hey, I'm not good at this, and I could really use your help with this, but you're going to discover some things about me that can help you out too, and let's team up and let's work on this together. That's an area where a strategic thinker can form a partnership with somebody who perhaps has gifts in other areas, right?
I think that's right. And on the top of a tank where you're taking apart, the breech block and the main gun and things like that with hoist and cranes and tools and everything, it's not a big what I'll call vulnerability safe space. You know,
No.
I mean, guys in coveralls full of grease, slinging, 80-pound tank rounds around and
Yeah.
so on. This is not, in today's lingo, a vulnerability safe space. So, but I think there are ways, even in that kind of environment, where confident leaders can say, "Hey, uh, I need the team on this one because
Yeah.
I won't succeed by myself." And I was fine with that because I was the other side of humility. I was confident enough to say I'm good enough in other areas that I'll prove my value to this crew.
Yes, yes, I love that. Dr. John Hillen is with us on the Faith and Finance Forum. He has a new book out called The Strategy Dialogues, a primer on business strategy and strategic management. Dr. Hillen, let's get to know you a little bit better. Where'd you grow up? What was your family life like?
So Army family.
Yeah.
Both my parents are New York City children of immigrants, Irish extraction on one side, Italian extraction on the other. Both my parents went to City College of New York, and came from, poorer immigrant families. And of course, an Irish boy marrying an Italian girl in New York City in the late 1950s. I think both sides thought they were marrying down in the social order. Um, but this is quite funny. But those kind of families, John. You've been
Yes,
around them, right?
yes,
Faith-filled,
yes.
hugely oriented on achievement,
Mm,
family values, and so on.
yeah.
My father went into the army. And so I was born in Fort Sill, Oklahoma, which is an
Wow.
army post in the middle of a Comanche Indian reservation, and um, and then moved all around. So
Mm.
an army brat, and then generally sort of settled down later in schooling life in Northern Virginia and grew up there. And then I myself, went to college on an ROTC scholarship and went into the army myself. So the army was kind of the family business in many ways.
Wow, very cool. So, talk to us a little bit about your early military career.
Yeah, so I did well enough to be able to choose what I wanted to do in the army. I chose being a cavalry officer. This seemed very very elevated to me. Every cavalry officer I'd ever thought of was terribly good looking, awfully dashing,
Yes, George Custer. Yeah,
heroic in the extreme, right?
right. Yeah,
So I thought, well, perhaps I can sneak into this and try to fit that mold.
yeah.
But it was a great mission because Cavalry does the same thing now it does in the movies.
Mm.
They get out in front of the main forces and they go look and poke around and see what's going on, and then come back and tell everybody else what they found. It's a dangerous business, and proves so in Desert Storm too.
Yes,
My cavalry unit went into Iraq a day before the ground invasion officially started, and went way out in front of the main forces to go try and find the Iraqi Republican Guard. So it's one of those things, but fantastic group of guys. I was on the border on the Iron Curtain, the border between East and West Germany, with young Captain H.R. McMaster in November of 1989 when the wall came down.
amazing.
And then HR and I and others were in the middle of the biggest tank battle since World War II in Desert Storm. And so talk about salutary character shaping experiences early in a career. This, it's happened between when I was 22 and 25.
Amazing.
So
Let's
yeah, very
talk.
blessed.
Yeah.
But what I remember most from that is not the experiences, the people.
Yes.
Those were some of the finest men I've ever been around.
Mm.
And that's not an exaggeration. And I'm not overly sentimental unless I'm in a pub and somebody plays Danny Boy, and then I'll weep like a child. But other than that, right, I'm not super sentimental, but those men are the finest men I've ever been around.
Wow. Clearly a great brotherhood. And if you could maybe just give us an anecdote from February 26, 1991, the Battle of 73 Easting, widely considered the greatest tank battle since World War II for the United States Army. Would you just give us a quick reflection of that day?
Yeah, so it stood in any other war, a heavy cavalry unit. We had 40-ish tanks and the similar number of Bradley fighting vehicles, which are almost like a light tank,
Mm.
all rolling together very fast through a sandstorm, what they call a shamal. So very hard to see, bad visibility. The looking for the Republican Guard, which was the elite part of the Iraqi military and the ones with the best equipment and the ones with the latest Soviet training at the time and so on. And in any other war, and then we stumbled on them and got in a very sharp engagement. In any other war, that would have been a small cavalry battle as a prelude to the big battle. But there ended up being no big battle because we sort of blew through them and destroyed quite a lot, a whole entire brigade of one of the Republican Guard divisions in a very short time. And then by the time the big forces came around, it's the other 500,000 Americans behind our little reconnaissance outfit. Most of the Iraqis had fled or were gone. There were a couple of other engagements, but this is one of the only engagements where the Iraqis fought back
Mm.
in a way that you can study. So now it's a much studied battle. There's all kinds of YouTube videos with computer simulations online, including one featuring me sitting on a lot of flak vests as we go through a minefield, which is kind of a funny episode. But uh, it was fast, it was sharp. The adversary, the Iraqis, made intelligent decisions to both survive and counterattack. We lost people, killed and wounded, and we made intelligent decisions to adjust and win through. So it's a classic battle with, even though it happened in a very short order, with multiple phases of decision making and action to it. And at the end of the day, one of the studies, and people came out and studied the fire angles on the destroyed vehicles. People crawled all over that battlefield for a while afterwards. But one of the studies said that if we had swapped equipment with the Iraqis, the outcome would have been the same.
Mm.
And the conclusion of the study was that it was crew training
Hmm.
that made the difference, not technical advantage. And I always tell people that don't know the military that the sustainable competitive advantage of the American military is not technology, it's training. We train like it's nobody's business. And I've never seen, perhaps the Brits who I know very well, and I chair the board of a British defense company or their American subsidiary, perhaps the Brits, but nobody else trains like we do. And that really paid off. We worked harder in training than we ended up in the war, and that ended up saving not every life, sadly, but saving many lives.
Wow, that is fascinating because you're right. The instinct would be that the United States military, their biggest advantage is technology.
Right.
That would be the natural hypothesis of most people. But you're saying it's the human element. It's the preparation, the training, the accountability, the high standards. That's really what separates the United States from the other militaries of the world.
Absolutely. And not just me saying it, but these studies show just
Hmm.
great. Yeah, the Republic, they had brand new Soviet tanks. They had automatic loaders that could fire around every 3 seconds. We had human loaders.
Hmm.
So our guys needed to be good enough to beat 3 seconds.
Hmm.
By the way, slinging a 75-pound tank round around in a little turret is a hard thing to do
I
in
bet.
2.8 seconds. And so on and so on. It takes a lot of coordination. So yeah, that was a great, and you think about how that lesson sticks with you in life,
Yeah.
right? So forever in my life, no matter what endeavor I've been in, I'm like, you know what? Just give me the people and
Hmm.
the time to train them, and we can do anything.
Oh
I
man, I
don't need the
love that.
gear. I don't need anything, right? Just give me the people.
Gosh, so good. So the other thing that you're well known for, alongside your military service, is your really distinguished academic background as a scholar and a professor. You have a number of degrees from King's College in London, Oxford, Cornell, Duke. Talk to us a little bit about your time as an academic, your research interests, your specialty areas, and then you want to shed some light on there.
Yes, so I had a Fulbright scholarship coming out of undergrad, and so after my first 4 years in the Army, I wanted to take advantage of that and the international education experience. So I went over to the UK
Hmm.
and got a chance to study strategy and history and sort of the British method,
Hmm.
which I much preferred because it's more about historical analysis writing, and there's less quantitative theory to it.
Hmm.
The American political science profession, as we say in the South, bless its heart, um, is obsessed with quantifiable methodology,
Yes, yes.
which I don't think contributes to any greater understanding of the world. Um, and so the British are not. And so a degree over there, my PhD is in international relations, is basically a degree in modern diplomatic history.
Hmm.
And I got to work with two knights of the realm, Sir Michael Howard and Sir Lawrence Friedman,
Wow.
really famous strategists, and learn from them. When I told somebody else in the field with whom I'd studied, somebody who really knew the people in the field, he leaned back in his chair and he said, "Ah, you were kissed by the gods." And so Sir Michael and Sir Laurie, who would never
Yeah,
describe themselves that way, of course, but the point was made. So that was a great, great experience. It was a faith deepening experience.
that's
I
great.
mean, Oxford still, I mean, the spirit of Tolkien and C.S. Lewis permeates the place. St. John Henry Newman. I mean, gosh, it comes out of every pore in Oxford. I often tell people, forget the Church of England stuff. As great as it is, the place perspires Catholicism up
Sure.
there.
Yeah. Gosh,
Just don't
interesting.
tell the royal family that.
Yeah, 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 clearly. Oh my gosh. Wow. Interesting. Yeah, I actually heard recently, I don't know if this is true or not, that in the next 10 years or so, there may be more Catholics in England than there are in Ireland, just because of the growing of the faith there. It's very interesting.
I think that
Um,
that that could well be true.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, it's fascinating. Okay, so the British model of studying strategy versus the American one, it's much more on. Would you say that we're studying historical events, historical characters, the dilemmas and the crises that great figures work through in history. Is that how you would characterize it?
Yeah, two ways. Two ways is if you have a historian's eye,
Yeah.
almost a literary eye, you make space in your analysis for the human condition and the vagaries of it, as
Hmm.
opposed to the ones that subject themselves to neat formulas, and then moral causes,
Hmm.
right? I think the quantitative methodological method seals out the moral aspect. So, for instance, you in international relations and foreign policy, um, I'm a big fan of Ronald Reagan. I'm on the advisory board of the Reagan Institute, and
That's
there's
great.
always a moral dimension to Reagan's
Yes. Yes.
foreign policies. Um, it wasn't just realpolitik. And I'm a balance of power realist. Like
Hmm.
I thought Henry Kissinger's brain worked just fine.
Hmm.
Um, but Reagan glossed on, this sort of, moral dimension to it. And I think you need to have a deep reading. In fact, I'll use a Kissinger quote here. Kissinger wrote in his last book, which one of my former students helped him with. Um, he talked about the importance of reading because it gives you a kind of deep literature background. It becomes the background music of your thinking
Yes.
if you are deeply steeped in stuff. And so the British method asks for that. It doesn't ask you to invent a formula and run a lot of data to figure out how the past may predict the future. Instead, what it does is it asks you to deeply internalize the nature of the human condition, the kind of things people have struggled or cooperated over, how the world has the people of the world have interacted with each other in the case of international relations, how people bond and form into what kind of groupings, and then how they decide their own affairs. So it's a very different methodology and one I much preferred.
This is very interesting. So, the moral dimension or the values identification step of a strategic process. Can you talk to us a little bit about what the appropriate, attention or focus on that should be? Because a lot of us feel that, like in today's, highly politicized environment, political leaders, business leaders, they perhaps get distracted by that stuff too much. They think that everything is kind of like a big popular movement question or kind of like being able to, predict which way the trends are going and jump onto that. And, talk to us a little bit about how you integrate those things in a helpful way, in a way that's, complementary to strategy without getting distracted.
Right. Well, I think one of the first ways is separate ethical leadership from political leadership.
Good, good. Yeah.
Right. I wrote a piece and happy to send you the links. You can put it out to your viewers if you notice.
Sure.
A cover story in National Review magazine in 2021 called, Against Chief Activist Officers,
Hmm.
where a lot of CEOs in that period, 2020, 2021, 2022, were jumping on board fashionable political causes.
Yeah.
And the case I made was what I'll call the good, Robert Frost, the poet, wrote, good fences make good neighbors. Well, I said,
Hmm.
good boundaries make for good civilizations.
Hmm.
And there are boundaries in your role and your economic duties as a CEO um, that should prevent you from straying into politics
Hmm.
and so on. So I'll let your readers take a look at that. So I think there's a difference. On the other hand, we're still short ethical leadership. I mean, just open up the Wall Street Journal. Every day there's an ethical leadership issue, it
Yes.
seems, in
Good
some
point. Yeah.
company or another.
Yep.
Um, so I teach leadership and ethics. And one of the ethics case studies I use is Volkswagen and the
Hmm.
scandal they had with cheating on their self-administered EPA certifications
Hmm.
with software cheats in a software code. So the question, Volkswagen is a good organization. It's full of good people. How do you get 500 good German engineers to all cheat simultaneously? Like, what has to happen? That's the research question, right? What has to happen?
Yes.
What kind of environment has to be there? And so what I do is when I teach ethics, I break that down and I show these five different kinds of ethical breakdowns that could lead an organization to go off the rails, create the environment that could allow this sort of thing. I co-chaired a commission for the US Navy on ethics in the Navy when they were having some issues about 10 years ago. And I learned a lot about institutional ethics. And in one place, I went down with the other co-chair, this former member of Congress from Maryland named Bev Byron, and we interviewed a wing commander on an aircraft carrier. Now, this is a 22 years in the Navy captain, F-18 pilot. So right out of central casting, 6'4", blazing blue
Yeah.
eyes, lantern jaw, right out of the comic books. And I said, who's in charge of ethics in your air wing? You have 1,000 people in your air wing. He said, oh, he said, that's the HR people, very good at that stuff, HR. I said, well, not really HR. I said, they can help you. And he said, oh, okay. He said, it's the JAG, it's the legal people, right? Because the ethics is a legal issue. And I said, well, they can help, but they're not in charge. And he said, the chaplain. He said, the chaplain, got a direct line to the man upstairs. Very, difficult issues. Chaplain's got all this covered. I said, well, the chaplain can help. So fourth time he got the answer right. He was in charge as the
Mm,
leader. His repost back to me was, that's fine, Mr. Ethics Chairman guy, but I've never been trained in that. I'm a pilot,
mm,
right? And it made me realize that we have an expectation of people to not only be leaders, but to be good leaders and to have organizations that people can trust. I mean, you've seen the surveys on American trust in institutions just
yes.
plummet like crazy over the last generation. Institutional trust is the glue of a well-functioning society. You've seen how it's hurt our church, among other
Yes.
institutions, people's perceptions. And so, I put together a curriculum and workshops. I did one for one of our big intelligence agencies, much in the news the other day. I did it for some of their senior officers on institutional ethics. How can you look around your organization and set a culture and a tempo where everybody feels like this is a place that doesn't lie, cheat, or steal? Everything is done correctly, and there are no rewards for cutting corners or doing things out of expediency. And leaders need to be trained in that and they need to focus on it because it doesn't happen naturally. It doesn't happen naturally.
Wow. Let's drill down on that just a little bit more if we could. How much of it comes down to hiring well? Because I know that's one of your other themes from the other books you've written, John. So part of it is just identifying people with strong ethics and morality coming in and
Yeah.
placing those people in leadership roles. But if what you just said is true, that it doesn't happen naturally, that there's continued cultivation after the hire that needs to occur, talk to us a little bit. I guess focus on you've identified an individual that there's evidence of high ethics and high morality through whatever,
Right.
references, career background, the interview process, evaluations of all kinds. You have that person in the seat now. How do you how do you continue to stoke that and ensure that that ethical and moral principled characteristics only continue to grow and strengthen?
It's a combination of things. Getting good people is part of it,
Yeah.
but the human capacity for rationalization is extraordinary.
Yes.
I play a game with my undergrads, and I say, in those restaurants where the soda machine's sitting out there with you at the tables rather than behind the counter, and there's a big sign that says no free refills,
Yeah.
how many of you have gone and gotten a free refill? Well, they're honest, every hand goes up.
Yes.
I say, okay, let's walk through. What could the rationalization be? And it's so easy for them to come up with how they rationalize. Oh, the first one was mostly bubbles. So it's not really a free refill. I'm just getting the one I paid for. Oh gosh, have you seen the margins that Pepsi makes on these? I mean, it's just sugar and bubbly water, right? Yeah,
Right. Yeah.
those guys don't deserve, it's a victimless crime and so on and so on. So I think one of the best things leaders can do is recognize, no matter who's in your organization, if it's an organization like Volkswagen was at the time, suffering from an ethical lapse, or the Navy was at the time,
Yeah.
it's almost never because there's some Dr. Evil figure sitting in the basement stroking a cat and trying to figure out how do I blow this place up ethically.
Mm.
Every once in a while, you see, like in banking and elsewhere, you see a supervillain, but it's almost never a supervillain. The real problems are caused. Look at the Wells Fargo issue of a couple of years ago, the selling of
Yep.
the fake products and so on. Hundreds of people involved, hundreds of people being rewarded. So it really comes down to incentives. It really comes down to awareness. That's why I give people these five, what I call ethical breakdowns,
Mm.
slippery slopes, um, indirect blindness, overvaluing outcomes.
Mm.
And so I had
Yeah.
these, five things I borrowed from the literature. I say these all need to be on your radar, and they light up. If you see somebody, you remember, I know you and I both love sports. You
Yes.
remember the when baseball went on strike in the mid 90s
Yep.
and they were having trouble getting fans back in the stands. And a couple years later, we had this incredible home run race with Sammy Sosa and Mark McGwire and Barry Bonds. And balls were launching out of the park a mile a minute. Everybody in baseball knew there were massive amounts of illegal performance enhancing drugs involved, but nobody wanted to admit it because baseball was back. And if
Right.
you're for America, you're
Yep.
for baseball and so on. So we call it motivated blindness, right? There was a motivation to be, and these are unconscious. What I try to tell people is to have a well-functioning ethical organization. It's not about finding somebody with their hand in the cookie jar.
Mm.
It's about setting the cultural tone, and as a leader, having the cultural awareness that people do a lot of this unconsciously because of incentives and conflicts of interest. And you've just got to be attendant to that as a leader.
Oh, I love it. John, drawing back to your study of strategy, would you, just because you're so well versed in this, has been such a big part of your research and academic background, can you just walk us through perhaps a well-known historic event or an event by a well-known public figure in recent history where you feel that their implementation of strategy was particularly effective, be that in the political life, corporate life, the battlefield, whichever domain you think is appropriate, but just walk us through like why you think that individual's performance in that situation was particularly strategically effective.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of good examples. And one of the things I tell people is look around you, you'll see it.
Mm,
So, I'll just take one company that's as a corporate example just been really successful. Um, Whatever you think of it or not, it's been successful by any measurement, and that's Netflix.
mm,
So Netflix has had to reinvent itself a couple of times because the environment around it was changing and the things available to it as a company were changing simultaneously, whether it was consumer habits through to technology and everything else in between. So it started because the founder was upset about having to pay an enormous late fee for mailing back a lost then found Blockbuster tape. Um, and so he said, there's got to be a better way to do exactly the same thing that Blockbuster wants, which is let people watch what they want in their home when they want to. Still the essential value proposition of that whole business. And then the technology changed and it became cheap and available to mail overnight DVDs, but people needed DVD players,
mm,
right? So they packaged Netflix subscriptions in with DVD players. And then they became a DVD shipping company. And they're sitting around a warehouse in Sacramento, California. They're a logistics company. And then somebody said, well, guess what? People are starting to watch things online because the bandwidth and the technology's improving. They said, maybe we can deliver things online too. Well, we need to become a technology company, but we're sitting in a warehouse in Sacramento. We don't know anything about technology. Said reinvent it as a technology. And then the third iteration, after they mastered that and put Blockbuster out of business, was they're dying because the studios are charging them so much to rebroadcast their things. They have to pay a licensing fee because they didn't create the content. They're borrowing the content. They're licensing the content from somebody else. But now they're technology and logistics guys, and they're sitting around. Someone says, "Why don't we make our own movies?" And they all look at each other and say, "You're crazy. What do we know about making movies, right?" And they're like, "Well, it just can be like there's people that do this." And now they create all their own content. So to me, it's an interesting strategy story because I talk in the book about how important it is that a strategy is constructed outside in, but it's conducted inside out. In other words, you have to start by looking at the outside world and seeing patterns. And I walk people through how to do that. Like, let's make this simple. Bing, bing, bing. I have maybe 25 or 30 tools and frameworks in there. I show people how to use them. But you got to look at the outside world first, and then you turn the lens inside. And you say, okay, what could we do about it? Who are we, and what are we good with? And so for Netflix, we, the logistics company, became we, the technology streaming company, became we, the entertainment production company. And that had to change. And that's a terrifically painful process for organizations I maintain that most organizations are only really good at one thing, and everything else they just need to like be good enough at. So I think that's a great corporate story. For political stories, you and I could go on and on and on
Sure.
over a pint.
Yeah.
But I think that's a good example of reading the outside environment, understanding your core competencies, and then being able to move and shape the whole thing, as opposed to just being victimized by how life is changing around you,
Yes.
which
John,
happened to Blockbuster.
yes, Blockbuster. And another good example I always hear about is Kodak, right? I mean, who actually
Mm.
developed the digital film technology and capability, but chose not to, invest in it appropriately, and they ultimately got shut down, right? And it's basically what happened, right?
Exactly. So that's a great example of strategy is not a brilliant idea game. Kodak
Yeah.
had the brilliant idea and they implemented it as an idea. But if strategy is a process,
Mm,
ultimately putting together a full game plan to get to a different future so you retain a sustainable competitive edge,
mm.
they didn't invest in the process. They only did the idea.
John, in a world where there's just so much going on, especially for a mid-level executive or a senior manager,
Mm.
where it's just you're trying to get through that list of things to do. Your email's backing up. You get the phone ringing. There's just a million things going on for family people of faith like you and I. There's other obligations that come in too. I mean, there's just so much going on. How do you, as a CEO, as a senior leader? Keep people focused on strategy and strategic conversations and make sure that that's a part of the daily thinking of your top people.
Yeah, John, it's a great question because it's easy to get sucked down into today's crisis,
Yeah,
right? When I look for what in Las Vegas they would call a tell, when I'm
yeah,
working with executive, I look for what's the tell that they're thinking strategically. Just sort of four or five things I look for. Do they look long term rather than just short term?
yeah.
Do they have a wide view rather than just kind of a looking at life through a soda straw?
Mm,
Are they realistically optimistic? I think that's an important quality. If strategy is about casting your mind forward into the future, uh, channeling a little bit more of a creative gene than you might, otherwise, and as an executive, you have to be optimistic. Strategists don't say that can't be done. Strategists say what would have to be true for that to happen. Now they may at the end of the day world say, no, that can't be done, but that's not where they start in their thinking. And I also look for people who are systems thinkers that put
yes,
things together, see how everything connects in life. So that's not, none of those things are helpful to task accomplishment day to day, week to week in the office. So how can you get that? Well, I'll tell you what, if you're running a meeting, anybody at any level running a meeting, take at the beginning of the meeting or at the end of the meeting, say, hey, just a quick check off, like a pilot would do in a plane. Is what we just decided in this meeting, how does that advance the quarterly or yearly plan? Let's just all look each other in the eyes and say, do we think that? Can we see the connection between today's decision in this meeting and what we've committed to as an organization to accomplish this year? You may not even sit in the room until it's answered, but you just put a bug in somebody's head that this matters to something else. What we decided today. Everybody's going to run back to their cubicle or back to their desk, back to their office. That what that activity is contributes to movement, institutional movement. So let's see that. So I say little tips to insert strategic thinking, which is long term, big picture. Just keep putting it into the room. Many executives are scared of doing this because they think it seems academic. They think it seems kind of airy fairy. They think it makes them seem like they're not on top of their game, right? Or it's only for big companies. Like I see small businesses are like, that's a big company drill, right? We just need to get stuff done tomorrow. And I told the old Irish, yeah, well, if you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there, right?
yeah,
So, talk to me the
exactly.
day after tomorrow. Um, but yeah, if you can put these things in the room, it demystifies the thing. Just simply connecting things together in meeting after meeting, I think gives everybody a start. It starts to get people. It's a muscle. And just like in the gym, you can activate your strategic thinking muscle if you know where it is. When I'm working with my trainer, I have like a funky hip. Just doesn't, left hip just doesn't turn on. And if it's not turned on, I hit the golf ball 30 yards shorter than when that muscle's activated. So my trainer is like, look, this is what you do to activate it. And I was like, oh, there it goes. Right. Yeah, that's the same thing with strategic thinking in the brain. You just got to know where it is and know how to activate it, and everybody can be a strategic thinker.
I love it. John, would you comment about how to handle scenarios where the strategic imperative or objective is not obvious? And I actually, go back to, earlier in this conversation when you mentioned as a young lieutenant, you questioned, why aren't we going on to Baghdad? Why aren't we destroying the Hussein regime, et cetera. Clearly the answer to that is that the strategists that were running the army at that point had decided that wasn't the goal, and a different objective was paramount. How did you, I guess, as a CEO and as an expert on strategy, how do you handle scenarios where there's just a lot of ambiguity around what the actual objective is?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'll use a sort of geostrategic example to start. So, um, I came into the political policy realm after the army. I wrote then Governor George W. Bush's defense speeches on the 2000 campaign. And so I know how to write speeches for a president or presidential candidate. So I wrote a fake speech about what to do about China for the president. And it was the cover story in a magazine about a year and a half ago. An Oval Office address, right? The president sits down like they used to in the old days for 35 minutes and gives a really coherent thing. It was, my fellow Americans, here's how we should think about this China thing. Are they a partner? Yes, they're a partner. Are they a threat? Yes, they're a threat. I'm going to put it all together for you and tell you where my head is, and I hope you can understand. So that was the idea. And I got a really nice response from people on all who come from all different perspectives. One of the interesting responses I got from strategists is they said, you never really identified like what the end game is. They said this is just like an interim step. Your end game was Reagan-esque in the sense of I want us to compete with this adversary who's also a major trading partner from a more of a position of strength. Okay. Because then I can, and I said, yeah, that's fine. I said, because if I can get comfortable with an interim position of advantage, then I can see further and the situation has developed and I can see some end states. So I tell people don't get obsessed about some final end state. What you should obsess about is advantage. You should always be moving your organization to a place of better competitive advantage. And I think all strategists need to think competitively. One of my students once asked me, like, why are all strategists paranoid? I said, because everybody's out to get us. That's why, right? This is obvious. So this is, I don't want to say it's unconventional because there's other people like Michael Porter and I think Roger Martin, one of the great business strategists who kindly blurbed the book too, who think this way. But I tell people don't get obsessed with an objective necessarily if it's not clear because you're about to jump into the future and the future hasn't happened yet. That's why we call it the future. But I want you to know how you can shape the future to advantage. And then once you're in that fog, you'll be able to see further in that fog and decide things. So that's the way I think about it. If there's circumstances that lend themselves to nailing down a determined objective, I think that's fine. But strategy tends to happen in a more contingent and more ambiguous environment of an unfolding future, which drives people who are used to finance, accounting, and operations management crazy because they want to plug in the right number and get the right answer. Where I'm like, I don't know. Let's let the worm turn in the bottle for another cycle and see where we are. Drives people nuts. But I think that's the way strategists need to think sometimes.
If you're somebody who believes him or herself to be gifted with strategy or inclined towards strategic thinking, and your colleagues, your peers, your teammates, they just don't seem to be getting that. They don't see you as that type of leader. You're strong in other
Hmm.
areas. How can you improve your presentation, the way you communicate, the way you interact with others at the office, so that the world sees that you are in fact a high functioning strategist and somebody who wants to play on that level?
Yeah, well, a couple of different manifestations of this. I think one is if you're having trouble selling people,
Yeah.
on your strategic thinking. And I outline in the book, the common objections to having strategy around the office. Um, a lot of times people want to ignore it. They're like, get that strategy thing out of the office, right?
Right.
We're busy around here. We have day
Yep.
job. We have work to do.
Got emails. Yeah.
Um, you know, and then some people confuse it with strategic planning or the annual budget drill,
Yes. Yes.
right? I call that corporate programming. I think I have a whole chapter in there that basically shows that not only is strategic planning as practiced, not strategic thinking, but sometimes it's they're the opposites in
Right.
some. And so that's an issue. But if you're having trouble selling your strategic thinking, I use an old Oxford debating technique, which is posit the opposite condition to people. So people are like, look, man, Helen, you keep asking all these questions about if we get this software release done by tomorrow, which all my people are crashing on right now, will it advance these goals, plug into that objective, and give us the point of advantage we've been seeking over in our marketplace? You keep asking all these things. I got to get this software release out. I can't take another meeting, right? I got stuff to do. Um, and my counter argument would be to posit the opposite condition. I say, okay, thanks, Mr. CTO. I empathize with the pressure you're under. Do you like a plan better where you're going to do the release and you have no idea what it leads to or the position it leaves us in? It's simply improved what we had before. But the improvement is the end in and of itself, and we don't know what to do with that improvement. Does that make you feel better as part of the organization? I've very rarely had people turn around to me and say, absolutely, that's the situation I want to be in, right? I do not want to see what's around that next corner. I just want to get to the corner. Right? So that's just the kind of way to bring people back into a reality. I mean, I had this argument even in national politics. Someone was like, well, look, I don't think that conflict over there is really our affair. I don't see why we need to be involved. And I say, okay, I can understand that instinct. It's a venerable, ancient American instinct about
Yeah.
sticking to our own stuff, right? George Washington's farewell address, all that.
Right.
And I say, but tell me what the world looks like in your mind, a world that is better for Americans' peace and prosperity, in which those guys who are sworn to our, if not our destruction, at least our expulsion
Mm.
and influence from that whole part of the world, win.
Mm.
People that are, you know, potently and openly arrayed against our interests, in which they win. How is that world better for you?
Right.
So that's what I mean by this. Posit the opposite condition and make people think through the resistance, the natural resistance they're feeling to thinking strategically.
Wow, so good. And I'm interested in your comment that you made about the corporate processes of strategic planning, and it sounds like you've seen some bad ones. I've seen a lot of bad ones, and people I know have reported the same. Honestly, John, I'm starting to get like a little cynical. I'm almost, when someone brings up like, "Hey, let's have a strategic planning process," let's have some workshops, etc. I almost have like a little bit of sense of dread because I just I'm not sure how it's going to turn out. So I guess, talk to us a little bit more about that. I mean, like, is there a way to do it right, and why is it so often done wrong?
Yeah, just, I tell people just separate it.
Yeah.
So if your annual budget drill is your annual budget drill, it's not your strategic planning process.
Yes.
So just do your annual budget drill. Who doesn't need a budget, right? Everybody's got to have one.
Yep.
It should be a good one. But you don't want to disguise it as your strategic planning process because corporate and budget planning naturally depend on known data. And if you have known data, it's known, therefore it's about the past or the present. It tends to pull your mind backwards. And so there's a dialogue, a Socratic dialogue around every one of these common episodes in the book. And the Socratic dialogue around this particular issue is there's a woman, an Air Force vet, logistician, who is the founder of a logistics company after she left the Air Force. And their life, is kind of like a mini UPS, if you think of it, or the laser ship, one of those type companies. And in the life of a logistician is time, budget, schedule, right? If you stand out on a loading dock at Walmart in the middle of the night, there's a guy out there with an iPad and a docking schedule. And if a truck misses its docking by a couple of minutes, they no, you're out, right? It's got to really, really flow. So that's their lifetime, but all measurable stuff. You can't measure the future. It hasn't happened yet. That's where the strategic mind goes. So strategic planning, as we call it, or I call it corporate programming, relies on data. Data pulls your mind backwards. Okay. Strategic thinking, you cast your mind forward. You ask
Mm.
what could be, what would have to be true for this to happen? How do I recast my problems as a set of strategic options and then test them? What are the costs of testing? What are the risks involved with testing them? How do I weigh it? So I give people frameworks that strategists use to organize their thinking. The frameworks don't give you an answer, but they might give you some insights, and the insights might lead you to some options, some of which may be testable, which may then help you make choices about the future. But they're very different arts, and I think a lot of it comes down to this American. I think it's particularly American, but it affects the entire business community worldwide. Almost obsession with having the data. Who's got the data?
Right.
Do you have the data? I get the data. I love data. I don't want to make a decision without the best data, but I also want to recognize this dynamic that the annual budget drill, disguised strategic planning, which usually leads to some modest improvement off last year's baseline, is not only not strategic thinking, it can be the enemy of strategic thinking. But it still needs to be done. So you just separate the two things.
Yeah, when you were talking about just the reliance on data, which of course, we all need it and it's important. Nobody's saying it's not, but I always think back to Secretary McNamara, who would compile all this voluminous data, enough data to fill, a million office
That's
buildings.
right.
But there was just so much, there was never any time to analyze it or actually utilize it in an effective way, right?
That's right. That's right. And
Fascinating.
yeah.
So
So yeah, so
yeah,
the
sorry.
American obsession with systems analysis has a pretty long heritage, as you just
Yeah.
pointed out. Yeah, it's both an advantage, but it can be a double-edged sword. You just need to know how to use it and when to use it, and know that it's not strategic thinking.
Yes, yes, well said. Well, as we wind down our time together, John, I wanted to ask your comment on this popular quote that gets floated around that culture eats strategy for breakfast. Do
Yeah.
you like that or dislike that?
It's fine. I actually heard it on a conference call yesterday on a
Yeah,
board on which I sit. Um, So it's become a cliche, but
right.
I think it's true. Here's the thing. I never thought of them as competing with each other, one up each other. The organization, so I've been the CEO of four different companies, mid-sized companies. I've done an IPO with one of them in the middle of the recession. I've taken public companies private. So I've had a fair amount of, I've been fortunate to have experience in a lot of different corporate leadership settings. And what did all those companies have in common? Because they were in two different industries. Is they had a great culture, values, systems of belief, patterns of behavior, right? The culture of the organization. And I viewed myself as the culture cop, right? My job, if values mattered to the organization, my job was to help police the values, create that environment we talked about earlier, where everybody felt good listening to the better angels of their nature and felt nervous listening to the lesser angels of the nature. But the other thing they all had in common is all the organizations were very strategically focused, constantly probing for future advantage and trying to shape the world out in front of them rather than simply be a victim of it. Like a lot of people, it's amazing. I mean, Fortune 500 CEOs whose basic attitude about facing the future is the way they face weather. It's just going to happen to you.
Mm,
I'm like, well, you know, parts of it, yeah, but
yeah,
if you also know, like I'm in Charleston, South Carolina right now, and we have 2 inches of snow and ice outside. Who'd have thunk it? There's no plows, there's no salt, there's no anything because it happens once every 7 years. So yes, weather happens, but on the other hand, if you want to shape your future and other things, right, you can prepare, you can move in it. So I think they're both really important. I can see it be abused and put the wrong ideas in people's heads to think of one as necessarily being superseding another one in the order.
right, yeah.
I think you're a poor leader if you don't consider both equally important and work at both all the time. And by the way, you're never going to see in a job description, rarely in a job description for executive, especially coming up through executive ranks, culture and strategy. And yet it's at the heart of every leader's responsibility.
Wow, all good. Well, we are out of time, unfortunately. Dr. John Hillen, the Honorable Dr. John Hillen, authored the brand new book, The Strategy Dialogues, a primer on business strategy and strategic management. It's available everywhere books are sold. I encourage you to pick up a copy today. Dr. John Hillen, any for good of the order, signing off thoughts for us?
Well, no, thanks very much and continue your great work. I'm a big fan. I think it's really, really necessary for us as a society.
And John, how can we find more about you for those that want to check in with you? Are you available on social media? Do you have a website? Where can people find you?
So LinkedIn is probably the best place to connect with me. But yeah, johnhillen.com is my website. And there's all kinds of bonus things on there too for people interested in these ideas.
All right, my friend. Great to see you. Have a wonderful 2025. Good luck with the book. Keep in touch. This is the Faith and Finance Forum hosted by the Catholic Finance Association, presented by Aquinas Wealth Advisors. God bless. We'll see you soon.